Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Monday, December 4th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Israel expands its ground operations in Gaza, says that the war in the south will be as big as the war in the north. So the big news over the weekend was that this truce between Hamas and Israel ended Friday morning, and Israel resumed its brutal assault on Gaza with just relentless airstrikes, and now they're saying they're expanding the ground operations into the south. The Israeli military said on Sunday that its ground operations have expanded to every part of the Gaza Strip and vowed that its assault on the south will be just as big as it was in the north. This is the Israeli Defense Forces Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi. He said, quote, "It will be no less powerful than the operations in northern Gaza. It will have no less results. We have the capabilities to do it in the most thorough way, and just as we did it with strength and thoroughly in the north of the Gaza Strip, we are also doing it now in the south of the Gaza Strip, and we also continue to deepen the achievements in the north of the Gaza Strip," end quote. So a lot of the airstrikes were actually still in the north, but now they've really ramped things up in the south as well. And if you remember, in the last show, I covered Blinken's visit to Israel, and what was the thing that he said he told these Israeli officials? He said that he told them to account for the civilians in southern Gaza before expanding operations there, and he also said that they could not kill as many civilians in the south as they did in the north. And here you have IDF spokesman, or sorry, not the spokesman, the head of the IDF, the Israeli military chief, saying, "We're expanding it. It's going to be just as big, just as brutal as it was in the north, in the south." So it just goes to show that Israeli officials are ignoring all these warnings from the U.S. about civilian casualties. And some other news that came out over the weekend is that the U.S. has been shipping Israel 2,000-pound bombs. So while on one hand you have these U.S. officials saying that they care about civilian casualties, they're also shipping these huge, powerful bombs that Israel is using on Gaza, which is one of the most densely populated places on Earth. They're shipping them these weapons, setting no red lines. We keep hearing that it's unconditional military aid. So how could they really be concerned about these civilian casualties? I put in a map from South Front here that shows the military situation in Gaza, and you can see the purple areas are controlled by Israel. So it looks like in about the central part, for a little further toward the north of the Strip, Israeli troops have entered there, north of Khan Yunis in the south. And it looks like even further south, there's some stuff going on the border there. So Israel might also be trying to enter close to Rafah near Egypt. So we'll see how the situation on the ground develops. And Israeli bombs, I mean, they've really been just decimating Gaza in just these 3 days. A UNICEF spokesman said on Sunday that South Gaza was facing the heaviest bombardment since October 7th and that there were massive child casualties. Again, talking about the South. Gaza's media office said that over 700 Palestinians were killed in Gaza from Friday to Sunday, so just in those 3 days. Gaza's health ministry actually issued a new casualty update on Sunday. I'm not sure if this was their first one since November 10th, but I know for a while there they were not putting out regular updates. And they said more than 15,500 Palestinians have been killed so far and 40,000 have been wounded. The ministry said that 70% of the dead were women and children. Health Ministry spokesman Ashraf Al-Qidra said the majority of the victims of Israel's airstrikes since Friday were still under the rubble, so basically saying they have not counted all the dead yet. And South Gaza, you know, I mentioned Gaza is one of the most densely populated places on Earth. Well, now the South is packed full of displaced Palestinians from the north. And as you know, hundreds of thousands have fled from there. And Israel is expanding its bombing across the Strip. You know, they're dropping leaflets of safe zones and everything, but it doesn't seem like there's any safe area in Gaza right now. According to the UN, 1.8 million Palestinians in Gaza have been displaced, and that's a population of 2.3 million. So, I mean, that's just a huge number of displaced people in the Gaza Strip. And they're saying that 958,000 people are sheltering at UN facilities in the south, at 99 separate UN facilities in southern Gaza. So it's just so many displaced people, and now you're going to ramp up this bombing campaign and this ground war in this area that's so densely populated. We'll probably see more casualties in the south than there were, civilian casualties in the south than there were in the north. So while you have the U.S. supporting this mass slaughter in Gaza unconditionally, there has been kind of these comments. You know, Kamala Harris said something about civilian casualties, and Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, said something over the weekend that seemed like he was criticizing Israel's tactics. He warned that Israel could suffer a strategic defeat if it does not do more to protect civilians. He said, quote, "In this kind of fight, the center of gravity is the civilian population, and if you drive them into the arms of the enemy, you replace a tactical victory with a strategic defeat," end quote. So Austin cited the U.S. war against ISIS, claiming that the U.S.-led coalition in Iraq did a lot to protect civilians. That's not really true. If you look at the numbers, there was huge civilian casualties in the U.S. wars against ISIS in Iraq and Syria, mostly in Mosul, Iraq, and in Raqqa, Syria. But there was that recent report from the New York Times, and kind of, just looking at the numbers, what Israel's doing in Gaza is, the rate of civilians being killed is much higher than the U.S. air war against ISIS in Iraq and Syria, which was very brutal. I linked to the civilian casualty files, which were reports that I think went very unnoticed that came out last year, detailing all of these hidden civilian casualties in the U.S. wars against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. All these leaked files from the Pentagon. If you've never seen that, go check it out, because again, it was just didn't seem like many people noticed this, and this is something that I was just overlooked in general, the kind of the brutality of the U.S. bombing campaigns in Iraq and Syria. And we're talking, from about 2014 to 2017, 2018, not the invasion of Iraq, years after that. All right, so the next story here, Israel is planning for the Gaza war to last over a year. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone, and he says that the Financial Times has reported that Israel plans to wage war on Gaza for over a year, citing the sources that they spoke to. One of their sources said, quote, "This will be a very long war. We're currently not near halfway to achieving our objectives," end quote. So according to these sources, Israel's goals include killing the 3 top Hamas leaders, Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Daif, and Marwan Issa, while securing a decisive military victory against the group's 24 battalions and underground tunnel network and destroying its governing capability in Gaza. That's what the Israeli officials, these sources, are telling the Financial Times. We also know from what Israeli officials are saying themselves that they want to conquer Gaza. They want to control Gaza after this. And if they have their way, they could expel all the Palestinians from Gaza or kill as many as they can. Seems like to be what they're trying to do right now. And U.S. sources have said that Israel's military operations in Gaza have failed to impact high or even mid-level Hamas members. So basically, they're very far from defeating Hamas. And if you're killing all these civilians, and you're that's definitely a major recruiting tool for Hamas. That's something that Austin was alluding to there in his comments. And on Sunday, The Guardian reported that Israeli officials estimated that 1,000 to 2,000 Hamas members had been killed. So only 1,000 to 2,000 out of what is 15,000 now. And it's not even clear if that 15,000 would include Hamas members, because a lot of them are down in the tunnels. And if they're collapsing tunnels and getting buried under rubble, they're probably not getting counted in the death toll. The Financial Times spoke with an Israeli military source who gave an estimate of 5,000 dead Hamas members, which seems to be an estimate on the higher end. It's tough to trust Israeli officials on this right now. But either way, Kyle makes the point that 6,000 children have been dead. So either way, more children have been killed than Hamas fighters, according to these numbers. But I think this gives a pretty good indication of what the Israeli military, what the government is thinking right now. You know, this isn't going to be a quick thing in Gaza. They plan on, they plan on this war going on for a long time. And again, after the fact, they want to settle this question of Gaza once and for all. And, you know, no matter how many people have to die. All right, the next one here, the U.S. sent Israel 15,000 bombs since October 7th. So this is another article from Kyle, and it says that the Wall Street Journal published details about the U.S.'s secretive arms transfers to Israel since October 7th. So since October 7th, the Pentagon has said they're shipping weapons to Israel on a near daily basis. They haven't been telling us. There's no transparency. But this report has some details. There's been other reports, but this seems to show more specifics. And it says that the U.S. has provided Israel with 57,000 artillery shells and 15,000 bombs, including over 5,000 bombs that have 2,000-pound warheads. And those are the Mk-84 bombs. So just huge, huge munitions that they're sending over there as Israel is just decimating, you know, high-rise buildings. This is the stuff that they're using, these U.S.-provided bombs. And it's not clear where the financing is coming from, if this is military aid, if Israel is purchasing these, or, you know, if it is military aid, then where are they getting the money? The reality is they could just spend. It doesn't matter if they actually have the authorization for funding. They could always just find the money somewhere for things like this. And that's the same goes for Ukraine. They had that accounting error that freed up about $6 billion for military aid to Ukraine. And if not for that, they would be out of money for that war. So again, we hear these U.S. officials talking about civilian casualties, but when they're sending that much firepower to the state that is slaughtering civilians at a historic rate, it just goes to show that those warnings and those concerns don't really mean anything. All right, so the next one here, U.S. warship and commercial ships attacked in the Red Sea. So the Pentagon said on Sunday that a U.S. Navy destroyer and several commercial vessels came under attack in the Red Sea. So later on Sunday, this was first reported by the Associated Press, and then later on Sunday, U.S. Central Command kind of detailed what happened in the Red Sea. According to them, according to the U.S. military, they said that the USS Carney, which is a U.S. Navy destroyer, responded to attacks on 3 commercial vessels named the Unity Explorer, the Number 9, and the Sophie 2. CENTCOM said that the Carney shot down a total of 3 drones, including 2 that were heading in its direction. So 2 that they said appeared to be fired at this ship. And CENTCOM blamed the attacks on Yemen's Houthis. And the Houthis did announce that they attacked 2 of the ships, the Unity Explorer and the Number 9, but they did not mention firing on the USS Carney. There's a chance here that the Carney responded, you know, was going around to these ships and just downed drones that were fired at the ships, and that it wasn't exactly under attack. It's not clear here what the full story is. But the fact that they're blaming the Houthis and they're claiming that the attacks were fully enabled by Iran, which there's no indication Iran was involved at all. You know, the Houthis are aligned with Iran politically, but they're not, you know, an Iranian proxy to the extent that people try to portray them as. They act very independently. And CENTCOM said that the U.S. will consider all appropriate responses. So this is just another area where things could really escalate. You know, if the U.S. starts bombing the Houthis directly, or who knows what they might do if they're blaming Iran. And so the Houthis, they're formerly known as Ansar Allah, they have been targeting Israeli-linked ships and firing missiles and drones at Israel in response to the Israeli onslaught in Gaza, which resumed in full force on Friday. The Houthis also recently downed a U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone that was flying near Yemen. So the U.S. has backed the U.S. has been at war with the Houthis since 2015 by backing the Saudi-led coalition against them. But it is rare that the U.S. and the Houthis exchange direct fire. One incident I can find was back in 2016, so a long time ago. The U.S. bombed Houthi radar sites in response to attacks on a U.S. warship in the region, a very kind of similar circumstances. At the time, according to the reports I read, the Houthis denied that they attacked the ship, but the U.S. did directly bomb the Houthis then. So I think that's definitely a potential response that we might see. And then who knows what's going to happen then. That could put the Saudis in a very awkward position. The Saudis have been at war with the Houthis, but the Houthis are doing this in the name of, fighting Israel. And it could jeopardize the peace that's been held in Yemen, the relative peace. There hasn't been Saudi airstrikes in Yemen since April 2022, which is very significant. It's given the people there a lot of relief. But if the U.S. starts bombing, who knows what that could turn into. It's definitely very concerning, these escalations. The next one here, U.S. airstrike in Iraq kills 5 militia members. So a U.S. airstrike killed at least 5 Iraqi militia members in Iraq's northern Kirkuk province, as the situation in the region is escalating following the resumption of Israel's assault on Gaza. Iraqi security sources told AFP that the strike targeted a site used by the Popular Mobilization Forces, which is a state-sponsored coalition of mainly Shia militias that was formed in 2014 to fight ISIS. So Kateb Hezbollah is one of the big Shia militias that we mention a lot, that the U.S. said they bombed directly a couple weeks ago. They're part of the PMF. They were on the same side as the U.S. in the ISIS war. According to Al Mayadeen, which is a Lebanese media outlet, they said that the Islamic Resistance of Iraq, which is a relatively new, umbrella group of Shia militias, and it's not exactly clear which ones fall under this umbrella, but this has been kind of the group that has emerged and is on social media, is claiming all these attacks and everything on U.S. forces. So they said that 5 of their members were killed, and they vowed, retaliation, and that they would keep attacking the U.S. So a U.S. official speaking to AFP confirmed the strike. This was just a U.S. official speaking anonymously. This has not been officially announced by the Pentagon. And this official called it a self-defense strike all the way over in Iraq, and claimed that it was carried out against a drone staging site. So U.S. troops based in Iraq and Syria have come under attack over 70 times since October 17th in response to Biden's support for Israel's onslaught in Gaza. There was a period of relative calm during the truce between Israel and Hamas. I know there was at least 1 rocket fired at a U.S. base in Syria in that time, but it was nothing compared to the weeks prior. But since then, since Friday, these attacks have ramped up again, and the U.S. has now launched several rounds of airstrikes in Syria and Iraq. I believe, by my count, this is the 3rd time the U.S. has bombed Iraq in this flare-up. And I know the Iraqi government was not happy about it the last 2 times that they did it. But the situation in Iraq, in Syria, is going to escalate. This group, the Islamic Resistance of Iraq, is vowing to intensify attacks until U.S. forces are expelled from the country. So it seems like everywhere we look in the region, there is escalation. Another one here, 2 IRGC members killed by Israeli airstrikes in Syria. So Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, said that 2 of its members stationed in Syria as advisors were killed by Israeli airstrikes. The Syria's news agency said that Israeli airstrikes targeted the outskirts of Damascus on Saturday. So the IRGC's website had a report that said their 2 members were killed. They named them. They did not say where exactly they were killed, but it was likely in these airstrikes that happened, that were reported the same day just outside of Damascus. So Israel has ramped up its airstrikes in Syria since October 7th, but it's important to understand that Israel has been bombing Syria for years now, with complete impunity. Syria never retaliates, and it's likely some arrangement with Russia that Israel is able to do this without real Syrian retaliation. Something is holding them back from retaliating. Maybe they just understand that if they do, then Israel could really bomb them. But recent Israeli attacks on Syria have crippled the Damascus and Aleppo airports, and Israel frames their operations in Israel. They usually don't comment on individual airstrikes, but when they talk about what they do in Syria, they frame it as attacks against Iran and Hezbollah. Even though the airstrikes mostly kill or injure Syrians, it's rare that Iranians are actually killed in these strikes. So this is always another risk of escalation. What if Iran decides to retaliate in some sort of bigger way now that there's all this stuff going on in the region? They might see an opportunity here to really try to hit Israel hard in some way. And so the last known time that Iranians were killed in Syria by Israel was back in March 2023. So earlier this year, so not too long ago, but in between that time and now, there's been tons of Israeli airstrikes in Syria. So again, it is rare that they actually kill Iranians, even though they say these airstrikes are all about Iran. Okay, so the next one here, the UK joins the US in conducting drone flights over Gaza. So this article is from the Libertarian Institute, and it says that the UK announced on Saturday that it would begin surveillance flights in the skies above Gaza in search of captives held by Hamas. So the British are now flying surveillance over Gaza, joining the US. I mean, it just goes to show how much involvement, that the US has in this war by flying surveillance for Israel while they're destroying Gaza. Now you have the British doing it. So it's more Western support for Israel. I need to mention that we are starting a fundraiser at antiwar.com, and this is how we get by. We are entirely reliant on our readers. It's how we're able to keep the independent editorial line that we have. It's how we're able to be so anti-war and non-interventionist, is by relying on you, our readers, and now the listeners to this show. If you like this show, it would not be possible without antiwar.com. And there's just been so much for us to cover lately with everything happening in Gaza. We've been pretty swamped, and I know my boss Eric and Kyle, they have been working extra on the weekends to make sure that the big stories are covered and updated on the days that I'm off. Just so much for us to do, and this money goes straight to funding the website. We don't have much overhead. This is basically just to keep the lights on. So go to antiwar.com/donate, see the different ways you can give. And it's almost the end of the year, so anything that you do give, you can write off on your taxes because we're a nonprofit. So that's a good benefit. So again, if you have the means, please help us out. All right, so to get back into the news here, the next one, shifting over to Ukraine. NATO says be ready for bad news about Ukraine. So NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said on Saturday that the alliance must be prepared for bad news about Ukraine and urged support for continuing the proxy war against Russia. Stoltenberg said, quote, "Wars develop in phases. We have to support Ukraine in both good and bad times. We should also be prepared for bad news," end quote. Stoltenberg acknowledged Ukraine has been unable to move the front line, but claimed that Ukrainian forces were still achieving big victories. He previously argued that Ukraine was having some success because it was inflicting heavy losses on Russia, although we know Ukraine is facing a serious manpower shortage. Stoltenberg's comments came after Zelensky acknowledged to the Associated Press that the counteroffensive, Ukraine's big counteroffensive, was a failure. He said, quote, "We wanted faster results. From that perspective, unfortunately, we did not achieve the desired results, and that is a fact," end quote. Despite the lack of success, Zelensky said that he's not backing down and that the conflict is entering a second phase. He says they're going to keep going. Stoltenberg says, let's keep funding this thing. That's what Biden is saying as well, even while they're focused on Gaza. Doesn't matter. Let's just keep the war going. And Russia is also digging in for a long war. Putin ordered the military to increase its number of troops by nearly 170,000. That would bring the strength of Russia's armed forces to 1.32 million people and the overall number of Russian military personnel to about 2.2 million. Ukraine is also looking for ways to bolster its depleted forces, including by expanding the draft. The Ukrainian military wants Zelensky to sign off on a plan to lower the age of involuntary conscription for men without military experience to 25, which could add around 140,000 recruits. Right now, the rules are nobody under 27 could be conscripted if they don't have prior military service. They can volunteer to fight, obviously. So they're thinking about ways to, add to the fighting force. And, if they do this, it's going to be more young Ukrainian men who are killed or maimed in this war that could just go on for who knows how long. All right, so the next one here, Ukraine claims that the SBU blew up a railway in eastern Russia. So Ukrainian officials speaking to media outlets on Friday claimed that the CIA-backed Security Service of Ukraine, that's the SBU, blew up trains on railways deep inside eastern Russia. An anonymous Ukrainian official told Politico that several explosions were set off in Buryatia, which is a Russian region over 2,500 miles from Ukrainian territory, so very far. Russian media and local officials reported fires and explosions on trains in the region, but did not say the cause. The Ukrainian official claimed that the sabotage disrupted military supplies being shipped from China, although Beijing has long denied that it's arming Moscow. This official said, quote, "This is the only serious railway connection between the Russian Federation and China, and currently this route, which Russia uses, including for military supplies, is paralyzed," end quote. But on the other hand, Russia's state railroad company, RZHD, said in a statement on a reported fire, this was just in one of the instances, that it did not disrupt service. They said they put out the fire and everything's running like normal. So, there's a chance these Ukrainian officials are exaggerating. And, that's what this is all about here, is kind of just to say, hey, look, we attacked you so far, so deep into Russia. Look what we can do, especially while it's clear that the counteroffensive has not been working very well, is not working very well, as it's clear that Ukraine's chances on the battlefield are very low. And the counteroffensive has failed. They've looked at these sabotage attacks inside Russia. They've kind of increased these types of operations. And this claim that the SBU did this, there was that report from the Washington Post recently that was very important that detailed how the CIA helped build up the SBU and the GUR, which is Ukraine's military intelligence service. And that included through funding tens of millions of dollars since 2015. And that report said that the CIA helped the SBU by opening a new directorate for the service and recruiting people with the purpose of forming groups capable of operating behind front lines and working as covert groups. So the idea, basically what that Washington Post report said, was that the CIA was crucial in giving the Ukrainian intelligence services the ability to carry out attacks inside Russia. All right, so that's it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints. We have one from Dan Caldwell, Our National Disgrace in Iraq and Syria, one from Gareth Porter, Peddling Propaganda About Al-Shifa, one from Ramsey Baroud, United for Gaza, Time Now for Palestinians to Protect Their Collective Sumud, one from Priti Gulati Cox and Stan Cox, Its Human Toll Will Be Incalculable, one from Akbar Shahid Ahmed, A Controversial Biden Advisor is Running the Agenda on Gaza. So that is it for me for today. I hope everyone had a good weekend. Please, again, help us with our fundraiser, antiwar.com/donate. It'd be nice to get this thing off to a good start. If you like this show, again, this is how it's done. We got to do these fundraisers once in a while. So if you have the means, please help us out. If not, please continue to enjoy my show and the content at antiwar.com. We're always going to keep it free, never going to be behind a paywall. That's what, we want this information to reach as many people as possible. But that is it for me for today. I will talk to you tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.